Okay, so let's start with question number one. So,
Mhm.
as someone who has worked in the higher education industry and you have firsthand seen the positive effects of education, can you, in your words, tell us the value of higher education? And it sounds like a very straightforward question, but hearing it from someone who's been so deeply ingrained
Mhm.
in sort of the actual institution of it, just your views on it, please.
So I will share with you something that I've spent my life talking about, and uh, I'll start with my parents. My dad's father was a handyman
Mhm.
because his strawberry farm failed, and he had to move in, and their home got covered up out by one of the TVA dams. So they moved into the city, and he became a handyman. My dad was the first one in his family to not only go to college, but get a doctorate. And I've seen the difference in what it meant in his life in terms not only of financial security, but also his ability to understand a lot of different points of view, being able to be a critical thinker, being a problem solver, being able to anticipate problems, what society problems are, and how still at the age of 96, he's deeply engaged in life. So, so education, I think, it is the big differentiator. And one of the things that I talk about a lot when I've done presentations is the fact that people who have a higher education degree
Mhm.
will end up making about $1 million more in their lifetime. But
Wow.
they will also end up with a far larger capacity to be a critical thinker, to have a more well-rounded view.
Yeah.
The example I give is that engineers who design things design them with the liberal arts in mind. You can create a cup, but what is it about the cup that's attractive?
Right.
Is it the way it feels? Is the aerodynamics good, but is the aesthetics good also? So
Right.
there's more than just creating something for a technical expertise. There's the human life in it. The woman this morning who was the president of the University of Washington was saying, I would want someone who was going to do surgery on me to not only have the skills to do the surgery technically, but
Right.
also, and more importantly, to have had an understanding of ethics, of history, of diversity. So to understand who I am as a human being and what my culture values,
Right.
and being able to help guide the decision making, for me as a human being, because he was another human being. And that's what I think higher education does. It helps to change society. And there's a lot of data out there that shows that populations that have an educated society are far more robust than those, they're far more developed than underdeveloped countries that don't have a large population of
Yeah.
people that have a higher education degree. Today, 2/3 of the population of students who are going to be going to college come from the bottom two socioeconomic classes. And one of the biggest differentiators higher education is to get them out of those bottom two socioeconomic classes. And in order to get them to the higher two, up several rungs, you
Mhm.
need higher education. The other data point is that about 60% of the jobs that are required for the future are going to require higher education. So if the country wants an educated workforce, if it's going to thrive as a country, it's going to have an educated workforce,
Yeah.
because the work of the future is going to require much more sophisticated thinking.
It's gonna.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So I think higher education is going to have to evolve. It's not just the idea of coming and getting a 4-year degree. It's perhaps getting some kind of certification that you then upgrade again and upgrade again
Yeah.
and upgrade again. So
Yeah.
you're constantly upgrading. So higher education to me needs to be the source for helping people thrive.
Right.
So.
Okay, that is all very good. And here's a follow-up question. When you
Uh-huh.
were just starting out your career in higher education, how did you view it differently as opposed to how you view it now? How has I know you obviously joined, this career path for a reason because you believed in it, you saw the effect it had on people's lives. But having been in it for so many years now and having done so much amazing work, how do you see it differently, or how have your thoughts been sort of reinforced?
So I started after I graduated college, I actually taught high school for about 17 years.
Okay.
But one of the reasons I wanted to begin to work in a higher education environment is because I wanted to be at the place where knowledge was being created, where there were people who were creating knowledge, things, ideas that was going to help shape society. And that hasn't changed. What has changed is who that is for. And become very obvious to me that higher education is something that it needs, that everyone, a lot of people need to have, if not all of it, pieces of what higher education can offer.
Right.
That I think is the piece that's changed for me.
Okay, very
So,
interesting. And I also
uh-huh.
actually really what resonated with me from our previous conversation was how you said that education creates a life and livelihood and how they're two
Yes.
different things. So I think that ties into this really well as well, because it's so interesting. It's not, like you said, it's not just about making that additional 1 million as opposed to someone else. It's also that holistic thinking, the perspective you have, being able to critically think and evaluate things.
I
Right.
think it also helps you create a curiosity about the world. Yeah,
Right.
which to a much more open-minded person and willing to look at other points of view.
Right.
And given the fact that the world has gotten to be far more smaller and much
Right.
more global,
Yeah.
that kind of thinking is critically important.
Right.
So,
And being able to understand like different cultures and being able to respect one another, that it also all ties in into being educated, right?
yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Do you perhaps have any example or anecdote from your career that kind of just supports everything we've discussed in the past couple of minutes?
Oh my gosh.
I'm sure you have many, so it's hard to narrow it down. Anything in
Yeah.
so
I'll give you one. I'll give you one
okay.
that's coming
Go
to
for it.
fruition in a really wonderful way. When I was working, okay, I can give you several, and they're all tied.
Perfect.
When I was working at Queens College, there was a woman there who was an art teacher, and she taught art, but she also did the art education. Which was it was the more grueling part of the education of the art department, but she was really a good person. She said, I want you to meet my uncle. So I went to dinner and met her uncle. And he had come from a small village in India that was near New Delhi. And had come to the United States and worked. He graduated from one of the IIE in universities. I think I had said that right. And then went to work for DuPont, had a whole career there, goes back to India and says, wait a minute, all the girls here are getting married at 12, arranged marriages, no education. He said, and the villages are all in a very poverty. He said, I need to change this. So he goes to all the village fathers and said, I want to start a school and I want you to send your daughters. They said, no. My daughter needs to stay home to earn money for her dowry, so we can get her married off.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, here's the deal. He said, you send your daughter to school. He said, and I will provide her with a uniform, breakfast, lunch, and a snack. And she will do crewel work that we will sell while she's doing this education. And I will put 2 rupees a day away so that when she graduates after 12 years, she'll have her dowry. Well,
Right.
they couldn't argue with her then.
Yeah.
And started with like 300 students, and it's now up to 2,500.
Wow.
And they now have a clinic that they serve the community as well as the girls. The mothers got involved and said, wait a minute, what about us? And so they help them create much more entrepreneur. The point I want to make is 2 of those girls now are at NJCU finishing their degree in health sciences, and they will go back and they will completely change the village in 2 ways.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're very well educated, and they'll be able to help with the health department there. But it will change perceptions in that community about what women can do. And so it was I just think that's the power of education.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yeah.
There was a woman that I worked with at Queens College. She was one of 4 girls, three girls from Iran, comes to the United States. She and her sister come. One sister stays back in Iran. The other two sisters come here, and she's working, but she was able to do this because she got a degree, and she works in the IT department, and it's made a big difference for her and for her family. So I've just really been impressed with the impact that higher education has on on people and on societies.
Yeah.
So that's a small example.
Absolutely perfect. Supports our entire answer. That's perfect. Okay, wonderful. With that, I think I'll move on to the next one. Is there any other last thing you feel like we should add for this question?
No, and yeah, I just, like I said, I mean, I even remember I taught high school. We had a really good math team, and we were the school that wasn't supposed to be able to do anything because of the big school system. We were the one school system where the parents, a lot of them still farmed, and they were not all very wealthy or middle class. And we went on and won the math championship. And the cool thing is, I tracked those students after they left high school. One went to Rice, got an engineering degree, worked for Duke Power. Another one went on to get a doctorate. They were just all really very much overachievers. And it's what education can do for you, no matter where you come from.
Yeah, very true. Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, with that, I will go to the second question, which also, ties into, of course, our general theme. But here we talk about how higher education goes way beyond what is learned in the classroom. And it kind of molds how we think, how we perceive the world, how we act. So how does higher education make us critical thinkers, and why and how is that essential?
So, and again, I'm going to draw on something that this woman said this morning, and I remembered it's true. So back when higher education, when education got started, it was the place that if you wanted to read the great books, you went to, or if you wanted to learn about history, you would read the book, and then you would regurgitate the information. Now, anybody in this whole wide world could Google and read the great books. They could read a variety of perspectives of histories of the worlds. What's difficult now is, how do you make sense of that? And more importantly, how do you make sense of disinformation? What's true and what's not true? And how do you help people become critical thinkers? Right. So it's critical thinking in terms of taking information and making it make sense for it, and being willing to ask the hard questions. It's okay, you're presenting this to me. Is this really true? And an example, as I was reading this morning, that there is a university in the United States, I'll leave it nameless, who wanted to change the history books that they were producing for some K-12 schools, that talked about the fact that the Indians that came to the United States when they settled only did it after the Tower of Babel fell. Now, if you look at all the history that anthropologists have studied, that's not true. They came over here like thousands and thousands of years ago. Yeah. So helping people take information and make sense of it, and having the patience to be willing to read all the information and then kind of absorb all that. And again, I go back to my 96-year-old dad, who still reads a lot, and he really wants to find out what's real, what's true. So yes, I think that critical thinking is very important, but critical thinking is also allows you to solve problems for things that haven't even happened yet. And that's, quite frankly, how we got the Industrial Revolution. It's how we got it's how we got where we are today with the technology that you and I use. It's and the question is, okay, so I can build this technology, how do I make sense out of it in a way that's and I think that's where higher education helps to make those things possible. So
I think this makes me think about this like concept, which I didn't even know about, which another one of our clients shared with us, and it's called future back thinking. Are you familiar with that? And
no, it's that.
I thought it was so interesting, future back thinking. So it's kind of preempting what problems you may have in the future, and then working backwards and kind of creating a solution today. And that's similar to what you said. It's being able to preempt, what issues may we have. Like, climate change, for example, of course it exists today, but how is it going to get worse? What's going to happen? And how do we kind of
Correct.
tackle that problem today? Which is, again, the critical thinking aspect of
Yes.
education.
And to me, it's connecting the dots for problems that haven't even existed. And one of the things that's going to be even more important in the future, well, tomorrow, is the capacity to be able to see vision forward, but being able to quickly come up to something you need to do today to help impact that future.
Right.
Because the future comes to us, the changes come to us faster and faster now.
Yeah.
And part of that's because we are so much more connected than we've ever been, but also technology. So
exactly. Okay, that's good. This is slightly more like vague, I guess, but any example you can think of that would support this topic, this theme?
how to make us critical thinkers and how's that? Well, I'll give you an analogy or an example. So my brother is an engineer for GM.
Okay.
And I didn't realize, but they created their first electric car more than 20 years ago.
Okay.
Now, didn't go well. I wasn't a market for it. But the fact that somebody at GM was thinking of this and thinking, okay, and it's all based on the concept of we have an engine, and internal combustion engines only use about 30% of the energy that's produced. The other 70% goes out in the atmosphere, warms the planet, pollutes everything. It's not a very efficient machine.
Yeah.
Electric cars are 100% efficient. They use every last bit of that energy. The difference is, and I asked my brother this, I said, well, then if you need to, again, future think, you need to think about, well, how is that electricity generated? And it's generated because you charged your battery up. Well, how did you charge your battery up? Well, I charged it up at my house. Where did your house get its electricity? Well, it got it at a power plant. Well, where did that power plant? Is that power plant, polluting the environment just as badly as my car was?
Yeah.
So the question becomes, what's a more efficient way to get energy sources?
Right.
So
yeah. Right. Just kind of, I guess, looking at every aspect of a situation and studying it and seeing what's best, right?
And what are all the unintended consequences of making a decision?
Exactly. So. Okay, perfect. That helps for sure.
And I think higher education does an excellent job. Well, it tries, to help people think about what are the unintended consequences, intended and unintended consequences of things. So
yeah, that makes sense. I'm just thinking what follow-up question I might have for this one.
I think one of the things that's important about the second question, when you talk about the critical thinking, is again what I said about how the pace of change is coming faster and faster, and our capacity to not only be critical thinkers, how do you make sure that you're thoughtful problem solvers?
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, I could solve a problem, but again, what are the intended and unintended consequences of some of the solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's so many larger problems that we face as communities, but a lot of the solutions may harm certain sects of the community, might harm the environment, might harm, various things. So yeah, I think thinking about things holistically comes a lot from critical thinking also. So that would be interesting to add. Okay,
I also think that critical thinkers need to think much more globally. What are the unintended consequences of? And the one I remember, some data points somebody explained to me is that some huge 70% of the world's poor people live in areas where global warming, because of the rising sea levels, are going to directly affect their ability to live. Now, what does that mean? Now, what it means politically is that typically, if you only look at Russia as an example, because I'm reading that book on that one, what happens when you have a whole bunch of very poor people who are not doing well? Well, there's political uprisings. So there's a lot of political things that can happen as a result of something, where life isn't good for people.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Again, every aspect, it's all one big ecosystem.
It's all very connected, which is why higher education is so important, because you're not just learning to be an engineer, you're not just learning to, figure out how to do something. You're understanding all the consequences, or, you getting a better understanding, or you have an appreciation of someone who has studied that. So.
Exactly. Okay, perfect. Perfect. And when we begin writing these, and if we have any areas where we think we kind of need to fill in the blanks or need more input from you, we'll always come back and ask you. So I think for
Perfect.
now we've got quite a bit covered, so that's good.
Good.
Perfect. I will move to the third one. So, Sue, we talk about how education is so dynamic. It changes as the times change. It's constantly changing. So how can we, this is again, I guess, preempting and thinking about the future. What do we change about the way educators are working today, or the way the system is today, to kind of, do better tomorrow?
So I'm going to use two catchphrases. One of them is just-in-time learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's making sure that higher education is creating the modalities for teaching, whatever the curriculum is, the way it interfaces with human beings, as well as businesses, as well as society, so that it's providing the intellectual capital that people need to be able to be successful. Societies need to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just-in-time learning, and then it's learning by all means. It's saying, okay, yeah, you're going to have to probably do this for the rest of your lifetime. You may need to do some of it online. You may do some of it face-to-face. Some of it's going to require that you're experiencing it. So it's experiential learning. Some of it's going to require that you understand things on a much more global scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people are going to need to understand that they need to get out and see the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I just, like I said, it's what I call it, it's a global society, but you need to have a local impact. Both of them are important. So, lifelong learning is really important. And then the other thing that higher education, which is one of the reasons I went into higher education, is that it is where innovation happens. Like I think I told you the story that the reason you and I got a decent shot, a COVID shot, was because of some innovation that was happening at Berkeley. Exactly. So I think, I think she was at Berkeley, but the competition was between her and the guy at Harvard. So, they were all doing, but it was building on things that had been done by a lot of scientists across the world.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. And so this is all, I guess, like broader changes and kind of broader ways of preparing people for the future, preparing education for the future. At a smaller level today, how do educators kind of transform what they're teaching in the classroom day to day to kind of shape or mold students better for the future? Like something as small as the syllabus we do in each semester that students are going through. How do you kind of get to that like foundational level and really make that
Well,
change?
that's where I think how faculty perceive their roles. To me, faculty have to be not only they have to be the innovators around the new curriculum, and they have to be able to innovate around it. And then the question becomes, okay, what is a syllabus? Well, it's an agreement between the faculty and the student. But does that need to be for a semester? Or is this something that's going to happen for 4 weeks? Or is this something that's going to be for credit or non-credit? Or is it going to be something that you just innovate for a particular company? You come in and you're helping a group of people at a particular company, get better at this particular skill or this particular way of thinking. But I think in general, higher education is going to have to become more multifaceted in what its role is.
Right.
But it has to keep its still core premise that it teaches people to think. So.
And in a lot of this conversation, we're talking about how to transform higher education for the future. But that's given the fact that higher education exists or people have access to it. What about people who don't have access to it, and how are we kind of looking at changing their futures or giving them access to higher education?
So this is where technology has absolutely, and COVID did a great job at blowing that one up. And the fascinating thing to me is that people are, particularly in the United States, are beginning to see, wait a minute, higher education should be available to everyone. And a lot of states are beginning to pass laws that say, look, we'll just make the tuition free or make it very affordable. Even to the point they talked about making it not only free, but also providing an income while you're going to school, so you have the time to be able to focus on it.
Right.
Or maybe what you end up doing is you do a little bit of training, you know, do a little bit of college, and then you work a while, do a little, and it's what they used to call the co-op model. You work a while, you go to school a while, work a while, go to school a while. So it makes something so that's much more integrated into your life. So, yeah.
Okay. Very
So
interesting.
I think higher education is going to have to think about different ways that it does that. So.
Yeah. And again, any example you can think of in this, something maybe you did in your past career where, you know, you kind of made a certain decision or did something, or like chose a particular action that kind of, you know, affected the future.
So one of the things that, you know, I worked my doctorate while I was raising my kids. So, and I was working full time. So you have to make sure that you have your academic home, you know, works with you, so that they understand that you have other things in your life besides the schooling that you're going to get.
Right.
At the same time, it influenced a lot of the way I think and the way I kind of approach life. So, you know, I just always see everything as a development opportunity, to the point that my brother, when he finished his career in the Army, he teaches high school now. And he's gotten very involved in doing Model UN. So it just kind of permeates everything that you do. You know, education is, again, it's critically important. It's the tool that I think it uplifts in society. So.
Perfect. Okay.
And then you have only to look at history. You know, if you look across the country at countries that are innovating and the ones that just can't innovate, no matter how hard they try, a lot of it is tied to their education level of their populace. So,
Absolutely.
And I know from my travels to India, and my brother's working in India, what they're working on now is the community college. How do we figure out to do community college? They have the technical schools, but how do you tie that in and to make it more of a liberal arts?
Yeah.
So just that, and they'll figure it out.
Hopefully. Hopefully. Okay, perfect. So with this, I will move us to question 4. I think we're good with this one. Okay, so Sue, your talent lies in reframing organizations to create a better future and have them kind of be prepared for future trends. How do you do that? And how do you sort of reimagine the way you see the world along with the problem you're solving?
So one of the things I think you have to do as a leader is to be visionary enough to know what the future is going to be.
Right.
But you also better have on your team people who also can see the vision, you know, themselves, and are helping you kind of formulate that.
Right.
So the other thing I think you have to do as a leader, and I borrowed this from a guy who's the past CEO of ADP. ADP, as you know, is the HR module for many organizations. And he turned that organization around, really got it moving. And one of the ways he did it was using what he calls the pole vaulting principle. It was a very large organization, and he was always encouraging his people to innovate and to work hard and be successful. And so he had one of his guys call him up and said, well, we did a great job. I was in California. We did a great job with this project that we had done. And so the CEO said, great, you plan a big party for everybody, I'll come. So he gets there, and the first thing he tells all the people is, congratulations, and I need to know what's next. And they said, wait a minute, we just finished doing all this work. And he said, that's correct. He said, and what's next? And what he tried to teach his employees, his leaders, is that there's only one sport in that you succeed by failing, and it's pole vaulting. And so every time you succeed, you need to immediately stretch to get higher and higher and higher. And so that's what I was trying to encourage my employees to do, was to think like pole vaulters.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. I like that. Okay.
The other thing that I think that's really important to help us reframe our organizations is to make sure that the people in your organizations have a diversity of thought. They have to have a diversity of backgrounds, and they have to have diversity of ethnicities. And they have to have, in my mind, a diversity of origins.
Right.
And again, you have only to look at societies that said, well, you know what, we only want, and I use the analogy, we only want left-handed people. Well, they're going to be pretty boring.
Yeah, that is true. Okay. And the pole vaulting analogy is good, but any specific other example you can think of from your career that, will fit into
Well,
this?
one of the things I remember I did my very first 2 years was I attended the Harvard IEM conference, IEM workshop, where we studied something called reframing organizations.
I'm sorry, what was the workshop called? Harvard what workshop?
Institute for Executive Management.
Okay.
And it was a 2-week, and we had to read a book called Reframing Organizations. And it forced us to rethink about how our organizations perceived itself. I think organizations have to understand that they have to be more fluid in the way that they operate. They might even have to revisit what their values are and what their mission is. Particularly in light of the fact, again, that change comes so quickly now. So
Right. Again, it's about like preempting the future, right? And
preempting the future. Yes. Yep. Without losing your fundamental, value of who you are.
Sure.
Yeah. But then again, I think even that you have to rethink, okay, that's worked for us for 2,000 years. Is it time to think a little bit differently? So,
yeah,
because if we were doing higher education the way they did higher education at Harvard in 1600, we'd all be learning to be ministers. Because that's what they were doing.
Right. That's not what we need anymore.
No, it isn't.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to add to this last question?
Oh, here's another one. Yeah, this was something that really came out of it is that you have to walk the walk. You have to walk the talk. You can't just talk about what you're going to be. You have to show it. So
yeah,
I think that's very important.
Okay, that's perfect. I am just going over my notes to see if I want to pick your brain about anything else. I think we're good for now. Any other last words you think you need to add?
No, I'm sure I'll hang up and have 10.
Feel free to email me all 10.
Okay. I will send you those documents that might help you with some of these other things.
Absolutely.
So
okay,
yeah.
I'm just gonna stop